Morning Dahrug. Morning Daniel. Qatar. Farah. Mariam. Minna.
ظهرك يا مصر.
Morning Ahmed. Mirna. Kiki.
Good morning, Yunus.
Morning. Morning Ahmed. Hamid. Luigi. Basant. Omar. Peter. Salma. Samar. Shahid Ibrahim. Yauta. Samar. Ibrahim. Yauta. And Jana Sabh. Abdul Rahman. Jana. Sure. So I think I've admitted all the people in the waiting room. Yes, there are 20. This is Maya. Maya. Okay, guys, thank you for joining on time. Last time I have, or we had 5 absentees. Gamal, Abul Farh, Shahid Tamim, Hamid, and Kareem didn't attend last session. The 2 sessions, they were absent. They didn't show up last Tuesday. Today, so far, there are 21 few waiting for another 6 students to join us. I'd like to thank those who went to Pixton and registered. I have 10 names so far. Basant, Danielle, Mariam, Maya, Minna, Omar, Peter, Selma, Samar, Yauta. Thank you very much. You have lovely avatars. I love your avatars. All of you have avatars, except for Samar, I think, but it's not that important. Please, other guys, join as soon as possible, because as I said before, you may need it for your project this term. Okay. Last time I asked you to read chapter 2. I'll share the screen first. This is just a second. Where is it? Yes, here it is. Last time I asked you to read chapter 2, sorry, the grindstone, as a homework or as an assignment. And please, if you have read it, put your hand up, and I'll ask a couple of questions to make sure you read it. If you have read chapter 2, book the 3rd, chapter 2, Nada. So Nada has read it. Thank you, Nada. I'll ask question, guys, or maybe a question or 2 to make sure you read it. Nada only? Did anyone else read it? Okay, Nada, thank you very much. Nada, I have a question here. The question is, who comes to France in chapter 2? Some people come back to France from England in chapter 2. There are 4. Can you name 2 or 3 of them or all of them? Nada? Mirna also read it. Thank you, Mirna. So Nada and Mirna. Nada, can you hear me?
Yes.
Mirna also read it. Okay, guys, answer quickly, please. Respond to my questions quickly, guys. So I have 3 guys who read chapter 2.
Anyone answers or?
And Nada. Nada, I ask Nada the question now. Uh, uh, 4 people came back to France from England in chapter 2. Can you name 2 or 3 or all of them?
1 second, I'm trying to remember because I read so many chapters.
No problem.
So,
Okay, Minna or Mirna to answer this question.
I could answer.
Okay, Mirna, go ahead.
So I think Mr. Lorry and Dr. Manat and Lucy Manat.
Thank you. In fact, Mr. Lorry was in France before them. Dr. Manat, Lucy Manat, and her maid, Miss Pross, and little Lucy, of course. Thank you, Mirna. Thank you very much. Right. I have another question here. Nada and Minna, Minna, yes, Nada and Minna, if you can answer the question. Tellson's Bank was located in a house that belonged to one of the aristocrats. What is on the grounds of this house? There was something distinctive. People or the revolutionaries used to come to this place to do something with their weapons. Can you tell what this thing is, Minna or Nada? There was something, the ground of the house where Tellson's Bank in London is located. The revolutionaries used this thing to, let's say, do something with their weapons. Danielle, did you read the chapter?
I read the summary.
Okay, so Danielle read it, no problem. Right. Minna, can you answer? Minna, if you know the answer, can you answer?
I know.
Okay, what's it?
It was an armory.
Yeah, it was a place, good, a place like an armory or a store of arms, but people came, or the revolutionaries came to, let's say, make their weapons sharper, make their swords and knives sharper in this place. Danielle, you know the answer?
A large grindstone.
A large grindstone, very good. A grindstone, and this is the title of the chapter, as you can see, a large grindstone. A grindstone is maybe a circular, big piece of stone, which you sharpen your knives and swords on. You know, we used to have them, and we still have them. Sometimes you have a gentleman in the street carrying a machine that turns around quickly to sharpen your knives or the stuff you use in the kitchen, cutlery. Okay, thank you very much. I'd like to thank Danielle, Minna, Mirna, and Nara, because they are the only people who read that chapter. Okay, so we're going to read chapter 2 now and chapter 3. And Omar, yesterday, Omar asked me about the Monday novel quiz. It will cover, as I said, in the post in Facebook, chapters 1, 2, and 3. From where can we study? You are studying now by attending the sessions. I upload the videos on SNS, or you can read the chapters. They're just about 20 pages, not too much. Okay, study from now because it's a little stuff. Chapters 1, 2, and 3 only. Okay, so who will volunteer to read? Who will volunteer to read the first page? I have Hanya's hand raised. Okay, Hanya, go ahead.
Okay. Tellson's Bank, established in the Saint Germain quarter of Paris, was in a wing of a large house, approached by a courtyard and shut off from the street by a high wall and a strong gate. The house belonged to a great nobleman who had lived in it until he made a flight from the troubles in his own cook's dress and got across the borders. A mere beast of the chase flying from hunters, he was still in his metempsychosis. No other than the same Monseigneur.
Yeah.
The preparation of whose chocolate for whose lips had once occupied 3 strong men, besides the cooking question.
So, Hania, in brief, this house, Tellson's Bank in London, you know, Tellson's Bank has some branches in Paris and some branches in London. The branch in Paris now is located in a house that used to belong to one of the aristocrats. Where is this aristocrat now? He escaped in the clothes of his coat. He got in disguise and escaped from this house, left it behind. Of course, the property of the immigrants was confiscated and taken by the revolutionaries. Now the house is used as an armory, as Minna said, and as part of it is allocated for Tellson's Bank in Paris. Go on, Hania.
Okay. Monsignor gone and the three strong men absolving themselves from the sin of having drawn his high wages by being more than ready and willing to cut his throat on the altar of the dawning republic, one and invisible of liberty, equality, fraternity, or death. Monsignor's house had been first sequestrated and then confiscated. For all things moved so fast, and decree followed decree with that fierce precipitation, that now upon the third night of the autumn month of September, patriot emissaries of the law were in possession of the Monsignor's house and had marked in with the tricolor and were drinking brandy in its state apartments.
Okay, go on.
A place of business in London, like Tellson's place of business in Paris, would soon have driven the house out of its mind and into the Gazette. For what would state British responsibility and respectability have said to orange trees and boxes in a bank courtyard, and even to a Cupid over the counter? Yet such things were. Tellson's had whitewashed the Cupid, but he was still to be seen on the ceiling in the coolest linen, aiming as he very often does at money from morning to night. Bankruptcy must inevitably be have come out of this young Mr. Pagan in Lombard Street, London, of a looking glass let into the wall, and also of clerks not at all old, who danced in public on the slightest provocation. Yet a French Tellson's could get on with these things exceedingly well, and as long as the times held together, no man had taken fright at them and drawn out his money. What money would be drawn out of Tellson's henceforth, and what would lie there, lost and forgotten? What plate and jewels would tarnish in Tellson's hiding places, while the depositors rusted in prisons, and when they should have violently perished? How many accounts with Tellson's, never to be balanced in this world, must be carried over into the next? No man could have said that night any more than Mr. Jarvis Lorry could. Though he thought heavily of these questions, he sat by a newly lighted wood fire. The blighted and unfruitful year was prematurely cold, and on his honest and courageous face there was a deeper, distortedly reflect a shade of horror.
Okay, so with Mr. Lorry, the banker, was sitting in Tellson's Bank in Paris, thinking of the revolutionaries and what if they rush on or storm in the bank and take the stuff, and what if the depositors come and take their all treasures kept in the bank. He had many questions in his mind while he was surrounded by the revolutionaries everywhere coming to sharpen their knives on the grindstone near the bank. Okay, go on.
Okay. He occupied rooms in the bank. In his fidelity to the house of which he had grown to be a part, lie strong root ivy. It changed that they derived a kind of security from the patriotic occupation of the main building. But the true-hearted old gentleman never calculated about that. All such circumstances were indifferent to him, so that he did his duty. On the opposite side of the courtyard, under a colonnade, was extensive standing for carriages, where indeed some carriages of Monsignor yet stood. Against two of the pillars were fastened two great flaring flambeaux, and in the light of these, standing out in the open air, was a large grindstone, a roughly mounted thing which appeared to have hurriedly been brought there from some neighboring smithy or other workshop. Rising and looking out of the window at these harmless objects, Mr. Lorry shivered and retired to his seat by the fire. He had opened not only the glass window, but the lattice blind outside it. And he had...
So here, on the opposite side of the courtyard, under a colonnade is a group of columns, or pillars, was extensive standing for carriages. Some carriages were indeed some carriages of Monsieur yet stood. Monsieur left behind some of his, let's say, ostentatious or very rich carriages. Against two of the pillars were fastened two great flaring flambeaux, something like light, okay, or candle stones. And or candlestick, sorry, in the light of these, standing out in the open air was a large grindstone. There was a large grindstone, a roughly mounted thing, something that's a little bit high, which appeared to have hurriedly been brought there. It wasn't there before, it hasn't been there before, but it was brought from some neighboring smithy. A smithy is like a factory where smiths work. You know, smith is the person who makes things out of iron and so on, or other workshop. This grindstone was brought a short time ago from a nearby smithy or workshop. Rising and looking out of window at these harmless objects, Mr. Lorry shivered at the scene or at the sight of this grindstone and retired to his seat by the fire. He had opened not only the glass window, but the lattice blind outside it. There is a blind or a couple of curtains beside it. So he opened the glass and the blind.
Mr. Ibrahim,
Yes, Ahmed,
I'm sorry the internet is slow. Can I restart it and join again?
no problem. You want to join again? No problem.
I will start the net.
So, who wants to read, guys? And he closed both again. Who wants to read? I need a volunteer. Rashwan, can you read? Abdurrahman?
Yes, mister.
Okay, so he opened the glass, the window, and the blind, and then closed both again. And
she shivered through his frame. From the streets beyond the high wall and the strong gate, there came the usual night hum of the city, with now and then indescribable ring in it, weird and unearthly, as if some unwanted sounds of a terrible nature were going up to heaven. Thank God, said Mr. Lorry, clasping his hands, that no one near and dear to me is in the dreadful is in this dreadful town tonight. May he have mercy on all who are in danger.
hold on,
Soon
Abdurrahman.
afterwards,
So wait, Abdurrahman. So Mr. Lorry thanks God. Why? Because no one, as he thinks, he didn't know that Mr. Dr. Manette, Lucy, little Lucy, and Miss Plus are coming back to Paris to help free Charles Darnay. The man, feel thankful to God that no one who is dear to his heart is in danger in this dreadful town. Talking about Paris, of course. Go on, Abdurrahman.
soon afterwards, the bell at the great gate sounded, and he thought they have come back and sat listening. But there was no loud eruption into the courtyard as he had expected, and he heard the gate clash again, and all was quiet. The nervousness and dread there were upon him inspired that vague uneasiness respecting the bank, which a great change would naturally awaken, which such feeling roused. It was well guarded, and he got up to go among the trusty people who were watching it, when his door suddenly opened and two figures rushed in, a sight of which he fell back in amazement. Lucy and her father, Lucy with her arms stretched out to him.
Again, the man was thankful to God that no one dear to him was in Paris in this chaos, in this state. To his surprise, who knock on the door or enter Lucy, her father, little Lucy, and Miss Pross. 4 people. Okay, Abdurrahman, go on.
Lucy and her father, Lucy with her arms stretched out to him, and with that old look of earnestness, so concentrated and intensified, that it seemed as though it had been stamped upon her face expressly to give force and power to it in this one passage of her life. What is this? Cried Mr. Lorry, breathless and confused. What is the matter? Lucy, Manette, what has happened? What has brought you here? What is it? With the look fixed upon him, in her paleness and wildness, she panted out in the arms imploringly, "Oh, my dear friend, my husband, your husband, Lucy? Charles, what of Charles? Here in Paris. Has been here some days, 3 or 4, I don't know how many. I don't know how many. I can't collect my thoughts. an errand of generosity brought him here unknown to us. He was stopped at the barrier and sent to prison.
Yeah, go on.
The old man uttered an irrepressible cry. The old man uttered an irrepressible cry. Almost at the same moment, the bell of the great gate rang again, and a loud noise of feet and voices came pouring into the courtyard.
Okay, so again, Mr. Lorry, the banker, was sitting in Tellson's bank branch in Paris, and we know where this new bank is located now. It is located in a house that used to belong to one of the aristocrats who escaped in the clothes, disguised in the clothes of his cook, leaving behind the house and some carriages and some property. Then Mr. Lorry thanks God that no one dear to him is in danger in the chaotic city of Paris after the revolution. Remember, it was 1792 now, about 3 years after the start of the revolution. And then, to his surprise, or Dr. Manette, Lucy Manette, Little Lucy, and Miss Press enter. Why are you here? Lucy answers, Charles is in prison. Charles is in danger. As she said, an errand, an errand is a mission or a task. An errand of generosity brought him here. Who can remind me of the nature of this errand? You know why Charles traveled to Paris in chapter 1. Who can remind me of this errand of generosity? I have Myrna's hand raised. Myrna only. We said this again and again last time, guys. We said this again and again. Myrna and Minna. Who else? Luigi. Okay, Luigi. Why did Charles Darnay travel to Paris? They say here an errand of generosity. What's the nature of this errand or mission? Luigi. Luigi, I'm all ears. So looks like Luigi.
Mister, can you hear me?
Yes, Luigi, I can now.
He traveled because Gabel wanted his help.
Okay, perfect. He traveled back to Paris because he received a letter from the assistant of his late Marquis, Gabel. He was in prison called the Abbey, and he sent for Charles Darnay to help him. Thank you very much. So Lucy says to Mr. Lorry, the banker, an errand of generosity brought my husband here, unknown to us. Of course, Charles didn't tell them. He traveled without letting Dr. Manette or Lucy know. He was stopped at the barrier and sent to prison. Do you remember, guys, the name of prison Charles is kept in? The name of the prison in which Charles Darnay is
La
in
Force.
prison? La Force. Thank you very much. Who answered?
Minna.
Minna, okay. Thank you, Minna. La Force. So the old man, Mr. Lorry, uttered an irrepressible cry. He gave out a cry because a minute ago, he was thanking God that nobody dear to his heart was in danger. Now, 4 people dear to his heart, Miss Pross, Mr. Manette or Dr. Manette, Lucy and Little Lucy, and in addition to Charles Darnay, so 5 people dear to his heart were in danger in this city. Almost at the same moment, the big of the great gate rang again, and a loud noise. Some of the revolutionaries entered the place, and they were noisy. I need another volunteer, guys. I need Maya. Okay, Maya, thank you very much. Start.
What is that noise? Said the doctor, turning towards the window. Don't look, cried Mr. Lorry. Don't look out, Manette. For your life, don't touch the blind. The doctor turned with his hand upon the fastening of the window and said with a cool, bold smile, My dear friend, I have a charmed life in this city. I have been a Bastille prisoner. There is no patriot in Paris, in France, who, knowing me to have been a prisoner in the Bastille, would touch me except to overwhelm me with embraces, or carry me in triumph. My old pain has given me a power that has brought us through the barrier, and gained us news of Charles there, and brought us here. I knew it would be so. I knew I could help Charles out of all the danger. I told Lucy so. What is that noise? His hand was again upon the window.
Hold on,
Don't
Maya.
look.
Hold on, please. So Dr. Manette wanted to look out of the window. Mr. Lorry wanted to stop him. Mr. Manette was very self-confident and said, remember, I used to be a prisoner in the Bastille, and I'm considered by those revolutionaries outside as a hero. I am a hero here. And he said, I'm respected in Paris, not in Paris only, in France. Knowing me to have been a prisoner in the Bastille, when they know that I have been a prisoner in the Bastille, they would touch, nobody would touch me except to overwhelm me with embraces. They would just hug me or carry me in triumph and so on. So with this power, the power I have from being an old prisoner of the Bastille, I have the power to free Charles. I told Lucy that I will help her husband as Lucy helped me before. Remember, Lucy helped her father before. She helped him come back to life after he was something like dead. Now he pays his daughter back, and he is here to help her, her daughter, and her husband because they're all condemned to death, as you know. Go on, Maya.
Don't look, cried Mr. Lorry, absolutely desperate. No, Lucy, my dear, nor you. He got his arm around her and held her. Don't be so terrified, my love. I solemnly swear to you that I know of no harm having happened to Charles, that I had no suspicion even of his being in this fatal place. What prison is he in? La Force. La Force, Lucy, my child, if ever you were brave and serviceable in your life, and you were always both, you will compose yourself now to do exactly as I bid you, for more depends upon it than you can think, or I can say. There is no help for you in any actions on your parts tonight. You cannot possibly stir out. I say this because what I must bid you to do for Charles' sake is the hardest thing to do at all. You must instantly be obedient, still and quiet. You must let me put you in a room at the back here. You must leave your father and me alone for 2 minutes, and as there are life and death in the world, you must not delay. I
So
will be sub.
wait, Maya. In this paragraph, Mr. Lorry asks Lucy to go in a room, and this is the best thing she can do that night to help him and her father think of what they will do. Lucy, go on, Maya.
I will be submissive to you. I see you. I see your face that you know I can do nothing else than this. I know you're true. The old man kisses her and hurried her in his room and turned the key, then came hurrying back to the doctor and opened the window and partly opened the blinds, and put his hand upon the doctor's arm and looked out with him into the courtyard, looked out upon a throng of men and women, not enough in number or near enough to fill the courtyard, not more than 40 or 50 in all. The people in possession of the house had let them in at the gate.
Okay, Maya, thank you. So again, Mr. Lorry and Monsieur Manette look out of the window to see some of the, let's say, riot or mob, about 40 to 50 men and women carrying their weapons or knives and swords and waiting outside. A new volunteer, please. A new volunteer. So so far I have Myrna. Okay, Myrna.
And they had rushed into work at the grindstone. It had evidently been set up there for their purpose, as in a convenient and retired spot. But such awful workers and such awful work. The grindstone had a double handle, and turning at it madly were two men, whose faces, as their long hair um, wrapped back when the whirlings of the grindstone brought their faces up, were more horrible and cruel than the visages of the wildest savages in their most barbarous disguise. False eyebrows and false mustaches were stuck upon them, and their hideous countenances were all bloody and sweaty, and all hoary with howling, and all staring and glaring with beastly excitement and want of sleep. As these ruffians turned and turned, their matted locks now flung forward over their eyes, now flung backward over their necks. Some women held wine to their mouths that they might drink, and what with dropping blood, and what with dropping wine, and what with the stream of sparks struck out of the stone. All their wicked atmosphere seemed gore and fire. The eye could
So,
not
Mirna,
detect
wait,
one
please.
creature.
Oh, Mirna,
Okay.
sorry, Mirna, hold on. So here, Charles Dickens describes those revolutionaries, how they look. They look bloody. Everything, the atmosphere, the wicked, he says here, their wicked atmosphere seemed gore and fire, like blood and fire. Everything was in blood and fire. Even the wine they were drinking looked or was red like the color of blood. It was real blood, there was wine, and it was like gore and fire. Everything was bloody around them. The atmosphere was wicked and bloody. Okay, Mirna, go on.
The eye could not detect one creature in the group free from the smear of blood,
So
shouldering one another.
all of them were smeared with blood. Sorry, Mirna.
Shouldering one another to get next at the sharpening stone, were men stripped to the waist with the stain all over their limbs and bodies, men in all sorts of rags with the stain upon those rags, men devilishly set off with spoils of women's lace and silk and ribbon, with the stain dyeing those trifles through and through, hatchets,
Like small
knives,
These are weapons. Bayonets.
bayonets, swords, all brought to be sharpened, were all red with it. Some of the hacked swords were tied to the wrists of those who carried them with strips of linen and fragments of dress, ligatures various in kind, but all deep of the one color, and as the frantic wielders of these weapons snatched them from the stream of sparks and tore away into the streets, the same red hue was red in their frenzied eyes.
They're mad eyes. They were frenzy, they were mad. Okay?
Eyes which any unbrutalized beholder would have given 20 years of life to petrify with a well-directed gun. All this was seen in a moment, as the vision of a drowning man or of any human creature at any very great pass could see a world if it were there. They drew back from the window, and the doctor looked for explanation in his friend's ashy face. They are, Mr. Lorry whispered the words, glancing fearfully around at the locked room, murdering the prisoners. If you're sure of what you say, if you really have the power you think you have, as I believe you have, make yourself known to these devils and get taken to La Force. It may be too late, I don't know, but let it not be a minute later.
Okay, thank you, Mirna. So in the last paragraph, Mr. Lorry tells Dr. Manette that these devils, these revolutionaries, these mobs are sharpening their different weapons. Why? They sharpen these weapons and then leave and go to La Force, the prison where Charles is kept, and kill the prisoners. So if you have any power, Dr. Manette, as you have just said, please go soon. Go. It may be too late, as he said here. I don't know, but let it not be a minute later. Go directly to these revolutionary outside and tell them who you are. Tell them that you are a former prisoner of the Bastille, and they, as you said, will carry you on their shoulders and move to the or head for the La Force and free your son-in-law. Okay, Thank you very much. Still have about 4 minutes before the end of this session. I need a fast reader this time, guys. Who can read fast? Who can read fast? Yauta, are you there?
Yes, yeah, Mister.
Can you read?
Sure.
Thank you.
Should I start reading from Dr. Manette?
Yes, yes.
Okay, Dr. Manette pressed his hand, hastened beheaded out of his room, and was in the courtyard when Mr. Lorry regained his mind, his streaming white hair, his remarkable face, and his impetuous confidence of his manner, as he put the weapon aside like water, cried him in an instant to the heart of the concourse at the stone. For a few moments there was a pause, and a hurry, and a murmur, and an intangible sound of his voice, and then Mr. Lorry saw him, surrounded by all, and in the midst of line 20 men along, all linked shoulder to shoulder and hand to shoulder, hurried out with the cries of love. Okay.
They started to chant,
Live
"Leave the Bastille prisoner! Leave the Bastille prisoner!" They chanted for Mr. Dr. Manette.
Okay, help for the Bastille prisoner kindred in the lay forest, from the Bastille prisoner in front of there. Save the prisoners, ever moaned at lay force, and a thousand answering shouts. He closed the lattice again with a fluttering heart, closed the windows and the curtains, hastened to Lucy and told her that her father was assisted by the people and gone in search for her husband. He found her child and Miss Pross with her, but it never occurred to him to be surprised by their appearance until a long time afterwards, when he sat watching them in such quiet as they night knew. Lucy by the time Lucy by the time fallen into a stupor on the floor at his feet, clinging on his hand. Miss Pross had laid the child down on his own bed, and her head had gradually fallen on the pillow beside her pretty charge. Oh, the long night, with the moans of the poor wife, and oh, the long night, with no return of her father on the tiding. Twice more in the darkness, the bell at the great gate sounded, and the eruption was repeated at the grindstone whirled and spluttered. What is that? No. What is it? Cried Lucy, affrighted. Hush, the soldiers' words are sharpened there, said Mr. Lorry. The palace is the national property and used as a kind of armory, my love. Twice more in all. But the last spell of work was feeble and fitful. Soon afterward, the day began to dawn, and he softly detached himself from the clasping hands and cautiously looking out again. A man so besmeared that he might have been a sorely wounded soldier creeping back to the consciousness on the field of slain was rising from the pavement by the side of the grindstone and looking about him with a vacant air. Shortly there worn out a murder descried, and the imperfect light on the carriage of Monseigneur, and the staggering to that gorgeous vehicle, climbed at the door and shut himself up to take his rest on it. Dainty cushions. The great grindstone earth had turned when Mr. Lorry looked out again, and the sun was rent on the courtyard, but the Lether grindstone stood alone there in the calm morning air, with a red upon it that the sun had never given and would never take away.
Okay, thank you. So it's done now. Dr. Manette went to rescue Darnay, but he's not back yet. Lucy felt something like unconscious, and it was a long night for Lucy, for Miss Pross, for Dr. Lorry, and for Mr. Manette, for Charles, of course, because he was in prison. Thank you very much, guys. See you in 15 minutes after the break, inshallah. Thank you all.